I'm a Christian, and up until about 4 years ago, I was a very naive Christian. And what I'm going to show you are about 7 sessions that I had where I actually met a luminary. I met Lucifer face to face, and I'll tell you how that happened. And I also had 3 demons that spoke to me and told me some things, and that's in the last session, session 7. I hope you bear with me. This is kind of interesting. You'll learn a lot. You'll learn things that only, I would say, the top echelon, the 33-degree type folks know, and you're getting it here free, so take care.
I work as a finance guy, a consultant for the top pharmaceutical companies in the world. And I know that pharmaceutical, or pharmacia, is another word for sorcery in the Bible. I am a Christian. When the pastor of my church asked me why I worked at my new pharma company, I explained that I am the eyes and ears of the living God in enemy territory. I was joking. But this one contract literally turned my world upside down. So I contracted at Roche Diagnostics, and I was on the executive wing, had a very nice, large office, really nice people worked there. And across the hall from me, when I looked in the window, I noticed a massage table. They had a subsidized massage therapist. Her name was Cathy, and she was very attractive. And I thought, geez, free coffee and free massage. This is a great company, a very liberal company. You can't top this. So I stayed for a full year on contract. Now, the boss who hired me, besides being from Mexico, was also a born-again Christian who believed very strongly in full immersion baptism. She would stop by my office door every morning at 8 a.m. and remind me that I needed to get myself baptized, fully immersed, baptized. And so I did. I actually did this for her and for myself while I was at this company. And after about 3 months on the job, I injured my back very seriously. I volunteered at a local food bank, and I was lifting crates at my age, and I actually hurt myself so that after 3 months I was still in quite a bit of pain. And I thought, let me just go across the hall and ask Cathy if she would provide some massage service. And so I talked to Cathy, and Cathy said she doesn't do massage, but she practices something called craniosacral therapy, which has to do with the skull, the spine, and the nervous system. And I said, well, great, would you take me as a patient? And she said, yes. We scheduled an appointment, and so I had my first session with Cathy. And here's what happened. So the next day I went to Cathy's office, and she told me to take off my belt and my shoes and lie face down on her table. Cathy told me that she was very religious and that she considered what she did to be kind of a sacred procedure. This was sacred space, which I thought was interesting. And so as I lay there, she said, please be quiet. Don't tell me where it hurts. Don't tell me anything. Just give me a few moments of silence. And so she went to the foot of the table, and she grasped both of my feet, and she stood there for a minute or two quietly, and then she walked over to exactly the spot where I'd hurt my back, and all she did was place one finger on that spot for about 30 or 60 seconds. And I swear I felt like an electrical charge in my spine. And I said, wow, that was amazing. I actually feel better already. How did you do that? And she told me that she was a healer, and that Jesus had told her that she was going to become a great healer one day. And so she was practicing what Jesus told her to do. I thought, that's interesting. I'm a Christian too. And so I told her that. And we kind of hit it off. And I scheduled a second appointment. So I wasn't born yesterday. I realized that when somebody tells you that Jesus told them something or told them to do something, it could mean anything. And I'm a vigilant Christian. I question everything. So I wanted to find out more about her. Most people that hear voices don't work for Fortune 50 companies, at least not for very long, and so it sounded intriguing to me. I wanted to find out more. I wanted to learn how she exactly did it too. My back felt great. Here, after 3 months of pain, my back was almost pain-free. So what did she do exactly? Did Jesus teach her how to heal people? It's possible. So I went back to Cathy's again for session number 2, and this time I removed my shoes and my belt, and Cathy reminded me that this was sacred ground, and she asked me to lie down this time, and she said, "Why don't we try something a little bit different? Do you mind?" And I said, "No, I don't mind. Let's, I'm willing to try something." I said, "Okay, this is very important that you not be afraid today. There is no fear in the sacred ground. You believe in the Holy Spirit, so you have to know that the Holy Spirit will protect you no matter what happens today." I said, "Okay, I believe that." And so the session began. And Cathy had me lie on my back, and she put her right hand on top of my navel and her left hand under my back. Now, I have to explain something. When I was younger, I dabbled in the occult back when I was a teenager, and I learned something from a book I read once about letting go of your body part by part and coming to complete relaxation, and then shutting off your internal dialogue. And I had learned this from my stepfather. He had a book in his library that I had read about public speaking. And he was a scientist that worked for NASA, and he had to speak in front of thousands of people. And so to calm himself down before a big speech, he would practice this meditation and the relaxation and turning off your internal dialogue. And one of the things I noticed in all the occult books that I read was a common denominator, and that was the ability to turn off your internal dialogue completely, complete silence. And so I practiced that on Cathy's table this day. And as I lay on the table with her hand on my navel, I felt like I was beginning to bond with her, like she and I were becoming one. And I know this sounds crazy, but I was starting to feel a lot of passion for her. I mean, I felt like we were really connecting on a deep level all of a sudden. And I felt an electrical charge that ran from the tips of my toes to the top of my head, all the way up my spine. And it was so powerful that it jolted me. I actually moved on the table. And I knew that something was happening, something between Cathy and myself. She was stimulating something inside me that I didn't think was at all possible. And I was very intrigued by this, and it was a bit frightening, I have to say. So after it was over, she asked me what happened, and I explained, and she said, "Well, I wasn't really present for this session." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, I wasn't in my body. My spiritual advisor had taken control of my body during the session." And I said, "A spiritual advisor? Is that like the Holy Spirit? What are you talking about?" And she admitted to me that she had practiced witchcraft. And I felt bonded to her. I mean, I felt a very strong attraction to her, like I had not felt with a woman since my marriage, and how did this happen with 2 sessions? So I was intrigued by this, and I wanted to understand more. And what was the electrical charge that I was feeling? And she explained to me that the human body was a battery, and that there was a charge that came up to the earth, and that she had used this charge. She uses it every day. And then she asked me, if I could have anything in life that I wanted, what would it be? And I explained that I was a painter, and that I wouldn't mind having more time to paint. And so she asked me straight up, "Let's work together to make you a world-famous artist. Do you agree?" And I said, "Well, let me think about that a little bit. It sounds intriguing, but I'm not sure what you have in mind exactly." And she said, "Well, let's schedule another appointment." We also discussed her form of Christianity, which I was completely unfamiliar with. It was a different Jesus. It was a different kind of Jesus. And I'll get into that in a few moments. But she also talked to me about the chakra system. She mentioned to me that my chakras were in horrible disrepair and that she needed to go in and fix them. I thought chakras went out back in the 70s, so this was kind of interesting to me also. But, I went with the flow and I listened. So I made an appointment and I returned to Cathy's for a 3rd session. And this time, Cathy reminded me again that this was a sacred place and that something very special was going to happen today, and that I needed to not be afraid. And I lay on her table, and she placed one hand over my navel and one hand behind my back for about 10 minutes with her eyes closed, and then she got up and she moved to the head of the table. And there she took one hand and she placed it under my chin, and she took her left hand and she placed it under my neck, and she fully supported my head. And we sat that way for maybe 5 minutes in silence. And I allowed myself to drift off. I relaxed my arms and my legs and my back and my face. And I let go of my mind, and I completely cleared my thoughts so I didn't have a voice in my head. Then she shifted her hands and she grasped the sides of my head and she cradled it. And she began very slowly to rock my head back and forth. And I began to lose all sensation of my body. And I was completely a thought floating in space. I could not feel my body at all. And I was trying to detect whether or not she was moving my head, because it was moving so slowly and imperceptibly. And then I lost all consciousness, all connection to my body, and I felt like I could hear the music in the room, and it was grounding me, but it began to split. I was hearing it from two different directions, and I wondered if I was hearing from Cathy's ears, if she was somehow inside me or I was inside of her. And I lay this way for a time, and then all of a sudden, I felt a flash, and I saw a beautiful woman, the most beautiful woman I've ever seen by a lake. And it was like a painting, but suddenly she turned, and she looked at me, and she smiled. And I remember she had long hair that flowed all the way down to the ground. I'd never seen hair like that before. She was so beautiful, and I felt such passion and such intense love for her that it almost crippled me. And suddenly there she was again, and there was a gown that was so brilliant, it flashed and it shimmered, and she turned and she looked at me again. And she was so devastatingly beautiful that I was captivated, and I was totally in love with her. And suddenly I saw her face, and it was so perfect and so purely formed. And she looked at me, and she smiled at me. And I lost my heart at that moment. I was hers, totally. I've never felt such passion before in my life. And suddenly she was gone, and I felt like I was going to cry. And the session ended, and I was back in reality again. And I was on the table, and I told Cathy about my visions. And she said, "Wait, the best is yet to come." So I went for my fourth session with Cathy, and each session seemed designed to open up a different chakra, or to focus on opening up a different pathway within my spinal column. And in this session, I again went to her office. It was the belt and the shoes, and I lay on the table. And Cathy told me that this was a sacred event that was going to happen again today. And she would ask me questions about myself. You know, are you a loner? When you were a child, did you think of yourself as being different from the other children? And were you different from the other children? Were you set apart? Did you feel like you were being set apart? And Cathy told me that she had in fact grown up in Hungary. She was Hungarian. And in some of the sessions, she would focus on the neck and the skull again. And I noticed that whenever I passed out, or whenever something extraordinary or supernatural would happen, just before it happened, the room would become very, very cold. It was kind of like some of those TV programs you watch, like Supernatural, but it happens. And in this session, she was going to focus on my sacral chakra, which is the second chakra, and it resides right below the navel. And she asked me if she had permission to put her hand there. So we spent the first 10 minutes or so with her hand on my navel again, and her hand behind my back. She focused for 10 minutes, and then she moved her hand, with my permission, down about 4 inches to where you see the arrow. And she held it there for about 5 or 10 minutes again, and I relaxed myself, and I kind of let myself go. My thoughts went blank, and all of a sudden I began to feel the electrical charge again. Except this time something extraordinary happened. And I don't know how to say this, but I had an orgasm. And I don't mean I had an orgasm below the waist. This was a mental orgasm. This was something that was 50 times more powerful than anything you can imagine, and it took place in my mind. And I was so shaken up by this event that what I learned later was that part of your anatomy is, in fact, a battery. It's a coil. It's your intestines, and they are coiled in such a way that they will contain and control a lot of electromagnetic energy. And that electromagnetic energy can go up and down your spine, and I was holding this energy, this Kundalini energy, and when it released, it was so intensely powerful that I almost went unconscious. And when they talk about in the Bible, the things that happen in Canaan and the Asherah worship and the sex worship that they had, the reason these Jewish people were leaving Yahweh is not because they were having sex with prostitutes. This was intense. This was 50 times more powerful. This was what they call sex magic. And I don't want to get banned on YouTube for saying that word, but that's what this was. And this is very real, and this is super powerful. This is demonic, folks. I mean, this is... I've never experienced anything like it before, anyway. Now, Cathy admitted to me that she was a little frightened when she did this, because she didn't think it was going to work. She told me that she'd only ever heard this working with women doing this procedure with other women. Is this something they did in their coven? But it worked on me, and she was very surprised. And my hands were tingling after this. I had to go to a meeting, and I could not focus because my hands were still tingling from what I had experienced. Another point I wanted to make was that what happened to me was so intense that I was fearful. And I was fearful because I knew somewhere in the back of my mind that this force, or whatever it was, could be highly addictive. I'm saying this because, I experimented with some drugs in my freshman year of college, but they were nothing like this. I mean, this was so intense. I knew I could get hooked in an instant. Cathy had tricked me, and I think somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew it. Cathy mentioned two things to me about this experience. When she had been initiated, as I had just been now, there was a room full of people watching. Her orgasm had been so intense that she screamed and screamed, she said, like she was dying, and she was terribly frightened that she was going to die. She also told me that what I had just experienced was just the beginning, that if I returned, it would get even more intense. So where was Cathy getting this power? What was her secret? Here's the secret Cathy told me. There is no such thing as sin. It's all a lie to control the masses. Sin is not real. And once you dismiss sin, you dismiss all feelings of guilt. It's guilt that holds mankind back from experiencing heaven on earth. She said, guilt is what makes humankind afraid. Without the lie of sin, no one would be afraid, and life on earth would be pure love. It would be paradise. It would be heaven on earth if we only gave up our notion of good and evil. If we let go of the notion of sin, It seemed so convincing. I was taken in. She said, "You need to try to open your mind to the truth." And I thought about this very deeply. I wanted so badly to believe what she was saying. And I thought, if there were no such thing as sin, we would be free to do as we will, to do anything we want. It would be true freedom. And then I thought, but what if I wanted to sleep with my neighbor's wife? And I decided to kill my neighbor. If there were no such thing as sin, we would not need a Savior, and there would no longer be a need for Jesus. But what would be paradise? And what is heaven exactly? Would that be heaven on earth? Where's this coming from? I'm calling this session 5, but it really incorporates 3 or 4 sessions that I had with Cathy, centered around the heart and the throat chakras, and moving energy up from the earth into my body. And I was kind of anticipating with each of these sessions something really dramatic. Part of me was terrified, and part of me wanted to have that experience again that I had in the earlier session. But what happened was a little bit different, and Cathy concentrated on opening my heart chakra, which she said had to do with truth and life. And what I found interesting about it was that the symbol for the heart chakra was in fact the Star of David, what they call the Star of David. And it's much older than the Star of David, because there is no such thing. David didn't have a star. But she worked on this heart chakra and had me focus on moving energy into my navel. We started with the navel and up into my heart area. And she was doing some processes there that I have no idea how or what she was doing, but I would feel jolts as she did this. My body would actually jump with electromagnetic energy, as at least that's what she was saying it was. My body, again, was a battery. And she moved then to the throat chakra, which was a little bit more intense. And the throat chakra had to do with your speech, what comes out of your mouth, which the Bible says is, everything that comes out, every word that comes out of your mouth is important, because it will be used for you or against you in the judgment time. And so I was moving that energy up to my navel, up to my heart, and then into my throat. But to do this, what Cathy did was she put her right hand on my throat and her left hand behind my neck. And then she very slowly moved my head back into what I would call a position of complete submission. You actually have somebody with their hand on your throat, and it was pretty intense. My body was rocking. I was feeling electromagnetic energy moving into my body and up to my throat, and it was terrifying. I was in a vulnerable position, and I found that I thought about this for a week or two after the sessions. As I was driving my car, I would suddenly have this feeling that Cathy's hand was on my throat. Session 6, the third eye. This session focused on bringing electromagnetic energy into the body and up to the head, to the center of the forehead. If the human body is the temple of God, then in the human brain, at its very core, at its center, is the pineal gland, which is the Holy of Holies. This is what we focused on in this session. It began as every other session, with Cathy placing her hands on my navel and bringing the electromagnetic energy into my body. And when it happened, the room became very cool. And then all of a sudden the energy erupted inside my abdomen. And Cathy worked it up through my heart, through my neck, and then she pulled that energy into my forehead. She asked me to focus very hard to bring that energy to a single point That was the third eye. Now, the third eye is literally a third eye in the human skull. It has rods and cones like an eyeball, and it can detect light, different kinds of light. But it goes beyond that. It's the elevation of frequency that is causing the body to experience a biological upgrade. A biological upgrade. That's New Age terminology. Think of the quantum field as one big invisible database, and the way you can access the information contained in this huge database is through your central nervous system. Anytime you want to sound important, put the word quantum in first. Changing beliefs and perceptions, a guided meditation. Anytime you hear somebody want to change your beliefs and perceptions, be aware, because they're going to replace your beliefs with their beliefs. Around this time, I met a guy on Facebook that claimed something horrendous had happened to him. He was listening to binaural beats, and something had split in his mind, he said, and he actually had to take 2 weeks off from work, vacation time, because he began to hallucinate to such an extent that he was seeing entities in his house. He was seeing people walk through his living room that paid no attention to who he was. They were talking to him. He began listening to what they were saying, and he didn't know how to stop it. So here I was on Cathy's table, and Cathy was directing this energy into my third eye, and I could feel that energy move from my arms to my hands, back to my shoulders, back to my throat, and back to my third eye. Now, Cathy had claimed that she was a dream walker, that she was able to see these entities and hear them all the time. Now, the pineal gland looks like a pine cone. Even the Vatican knows this. This is a Vatican sculpture, by the way. So the pineal gland, or this pine cone, begins to resonate inside your skull. The frequency changes, and as the frequency changes, the pineal gland begins to vibrate. And as this vibrates, it begins to create a chemical called DMT. Now, DMT is found in all kinds of plants around the world, and there are a lot of shamans and people that take DMT to get to the state. But I'm telling you, you don't need a shaman, and you don't need DMT from some plant, because your brain makes this naturally. So God created DMT, the spirit molecule, to last only about 6 seconds in the human body before the liver automatically eliminates it completely. So if you artificially stimulate yourself with DMT, you're kind of violating God's law, what God had intended for you. I know a woman that went to Peru and met a shaman, and in a shack with about 6 other people was given DMT. And as a result, she saw pythons begin to swarm around this cabin, and one of them came through the window, she tells me. And this python was actually placed inside her head. She willingly allowed this python to slither into her head and into her mind with the help of the shaman. Now, she told me that she had this python spirit inside of her for almost a year back in New York City. She was working for a major corporation, and she was turned on to all this through yoga. As these sessions went on, I began to experience a tingling in my scalp on the left-hand side. And I talked to Cathy about it. She said that the tingling was a sign that my crown was beginning to open. Is that a good thing? I explored this by attending several sessions with other witches, including the infamous Golden Dawn, which I actually am going to make a video about as well. Cathy confessed that she hears several voices in her head and has learned with time which are beneficial or helpful voices and which are malevolent or intended to destroy her. I cover this more in another video as well. She confessed that while attending her son's swim meet at Princeton University, as she leaned over the stadium rail to get a closer look, a voice in her head encouraged her to jump. And she caught herself, but for a split second, she was compelled, very strongly, to hurl headlong into the tiles below. That her spirit guides take over her body to perform these acts on me is rather terrifying. They offer me a glimpse into what life on earth can be in the state of power and overwhelming bliss. But at what price? Deuteronomy 13 in the Bible is very clear about that price. Historically, this DMT was harvested from humankind by the fallen angels. This happened before the flood. You can see it in the Anunnaki sculptures and the sculptures from Peru and in the Americas. They're always holding a pine cone. And this pine cone represents the pineal gland. And that little basket they're carrying, well, that's DMT harvested from the minds of human beings through decapitation. So they were decapitating people, and they were not only taking blood, drinking blood according to the Bible, but they were also taking the DMT, which they were then using on humans to cause them to worship. I mean, they worship these angelic beings, and this is one of the reasons God brought the flood. There are several reasons, including hybridization of people and animals, and also plants, but this is one of the reasons. These beings were creating havoc on Earth. So after mankind challenged God at the Tower of Babel, Nimrod and his associates got separated. God separated them and placed them all over the planet, including South America, in the Mideast. You got Egypt. You got the Aryans up in northern Russia, and you can see, the war that went on between God and these fallen people. There are pyramids everywhere. Every single country on the planet has pyramids. Cathy revealed to me a little bit about her associations and some of her education. She told me that she belonged to a coven, and that there were in fact male and female witches, and they were taking classes together, and that there was a woman, a rival of hers, that was extremely powerful and could move her to faraway places at will. I asked her to be specific, but she didn't say much. But where is she getting these teachings from? So I did a little research, and I asked her a few more questions. And before I proceed to section 4, it is important that one understand the direction that this movement is moving toward. It is the one world government and one world religion. Helen Schucman, a Jewish woman psychologist who claims Jesus spoke to her to tell her that 6,000 years of Bible understanding is all wrong. This is also Oprah Winfrey's teacher. Sussman claims that Jesus is one of many enlightened beings and that all of them lead to the same place, to heaven. Sin does not exist except in our minds. And the Bible says in John 1:1, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not." Can Buddha say that he made the world? No. I and the Father are one. All that belongs to the Father is mine, Jesus said. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. And from now on, you do know him, and you have seen him. Jesus said, "Before Abraham was born, I am." Oprah Winfrey taught a weekly TV class on the book A Course in Miracles, which came out in 1976. Psychologist Schucman described herself as the scribe of the book rather than its author. She said that she scribed the book from an inner source. Schucman also said that it was channeled to her by Jesus Christ. And now many women and Oprah fans are following and are followers of this new Jesus. After all, a loving God would never send anyone to hell. I heard Obama say that as well as Oprah. This is a movement, folks. So where do you think this movement is derived from? If you don't know it by now, Oprah Winfrey is a full-fledged witch in real life. Who you are requires no belief, she says, when teaching about God. She also says heaven is not a location, but it's an inner realm of consciousness. She believes this. The man on the cross is not real. He is simply an archetypal image. He is every man and every woman. My mind is part of God's. I am very holy. My holiness is my salvation, and my salvation comes from me. Oprah says that. She also says that there is no sin. Like Islamic teachings, God could never sacrifice his own son. There is no sacrifice for salvation in either Islam or in Oprah's teachings. Oprah finally announced she will not run for president, but she's supporting this man who claims the world will end in 10 years unless we hand him $5 trillion. Oprah pulls the strings. So by this time, I was becoming a little concerned about where all of this was going. Cathy told me that she would wake up in the morning and she would meditate and she would draw energy from the earth into her body. And her friends or her coven did the same thing. These people were very well organized and they were very well educated. And they knew who I am, I'm sure of it. So where exactly was all of this going? What was Cathy's intention? And you know, I liked Cathy. I was becoming dependent on her. Something else happened during this time that was also disturbing. My mother fell and she broke her hip. And the story is that she tells, while she was in the hospital, she was walking from one room to another in her condo, and somebody was in the room with her suddenly. And they lifted her up physically and threw her into the next room where she broke her hip. Now, my mom's not the kind of person that makes up stories. You know, she's pretty down to earth. So for her to say something like that, and she insists, even to this day, she insists that this is what happened. So that was odd. We then put her in the hospital, and I noticed that one of her orderlies, a guy who was taking her to the bathroom every day, when I looked at his arm, he had a tattoo of Satan on his arm. And he wasn't that old, you know, it's not like this is a guy who made a bad decision when he was in younger years. He was maybe 23 years old. My sister then hired some help for 24/7 to watch over my mom. And I noticed one of the women had tattoos up and down her arms as well. And as I talked to her, I found out that she was indeed into witchcraft. When I looked at her Facebook page, there she was with her coven. 13 women lined up together, all friends, and in a coven. So is that a coincidence? You tell me. So time goes on. I was feeling very close to Cathy because I had experienced some of the most intense moments of my life with her. And I'm driving along one day and I see a license plate that says Cathy. And I thought, you know, I should give her a call and just see how she's doing. She tells me the man that's living with her and with her 2 sons has reported her eldest son, the swimmer, of using enhancing drugs to increase his swim abilities for these tournaments. And he called the police to tell them. So this kid could go to jail. And she's very concerned and upset about this. A few months later, I see the license plate again. And I call her again to see how things are going. This time she tells me that the guy she's living with has cancer, stomach cancer, and that he has to undergo chemotherapy. He's dying. I mean, what are the chances of this? Everything was moving really quickly, and I made a decision that this was going to be my last session with Cathy. And it was going too far. I was going too deep. So I made it an appointment, and I intended to say goodbye at this appointment. And she didn't let me down. I mean, this was probably the most intense of all the sessions I've had so far. I actually had 3 demons speak to me during this session. So during these sessions, I was continuing to talk to Cathy about Jesus Christ. And I even gave her a Bible early on in the sessions and discussed things with her from time to time. She came out and told me that her spiritual guide had told her to listen to me, and that I had things that I could teach her. So I thought that was interesting, but I'm not sure if I was teaching her about Jesus Christ or if in fact I was teaching her how to pull somebody to the dark side. You know, who knows? But After this session was over, and I left Cathy, strange things started to happen to me again. And this is hard to say because nobody would believe it, but every day when I drove to work during this period, I would have a truck that would swerve out of the lane next to me on the left and swerve into my lane and just miss me by inches. I had one truck that swerved and missed me by a couple of inches, and he drove off into a field. I had another truck that swerved and just missed me and went into a divide. I mean, this was pretty serious stuff, and this happened every single day. And one time I was at an intersection, and I felt like there was a tapping on my shoulder, and as I turned the corner and continued to drive, this kid pulled out of a side street and aimed right at me, and I slammed on my brakes. If I hadn't done that, he would have slammed right into me. So something warned me in advance, to put my brakes on. So was this a coincidence? I don't think so. In this final session, Cathy seemed eager to see me. She said, "Please come in, I have something I want to show you." She seemed eager. And we went through our usual routine. I lay on the table. She placed her hands, one on my abdomen, one behind my back. We brought the energy in through my feet, through my throat, into my third eye. And then she moved to the top of the table and she placed her hands on my head. And I went into almost hypnotic trance of some type. I can't explain it, but I went really, really deep. And I felt a connection with her like I'd never felt before, like we were one person. And as I was drifting off into nothingness, I felt something inside me, almost as if some cold hand was reaching inside through my head and down into my chest where my heart was. And it felt cool. I mean, it felt cold cool. And suddenly I heard a noise inside my head, like somebody had pulled a string, like my heartstring had been pulled and had been let go suddenly, like I was a harp, a human harp of some kind. It was very disturbing. It was a very deep sound. So this is session 7, where 3 demons spoke to me. And I was still on the table. Cathy had played my heartstring, and now it was going even deeper. And I could feel inside me, I was letting go, my feet were letting go, my hands were letting go. I was very disturbed by what had just happened, but I wasn't frightened at all. And the energy was inside each one of my chakras. I could feel her hands on me, I could feel her energy and my energy combined. And then something strange happened. I began to hear something as I drifted, where I was in a dream state, but I was awake. And I could hear what I thought was a black man singing. And he was singing so softly and imperceptibly that I had to focus to kind of hear what he was singing. And the music that was playing for him was so intensely beautiful. I was being drawn in that I can't describe it. It's like no sound I had ever heard before. It was so beautiful. It was like the creation of the earth, what it must have sounded like when Lucifer played his instruments. And as I lay there and I focused, I began to realize that he was saying words, and they were rhyming. It was almost like a children's rhyme. And as I focused harder and harder, I could understand parts of what he was saying. And he was saying something really wicked. It was like a little child was saying something so disturbing that you knew it was evil, pure evil. And he was singing about killing people, about wanting to destroy everyone in a building. So I tried to understand this passionate voice and these feelings I had that were so compelling. Was this part of me I was listening to? Whose voice was this? Why was it a black man? Cathy tried later to tell me that it was my voice, that it was the voice in my head that was part of me that was singing. But that doesn't make any sense, because why would I represent myself as a black man singing? And what I found out later that evening was that in Dallas, Texas, there was a black man that had tried to kill the entire police force. He took a gun and I think he shot 2 police officers before he was stopped, but his intent was to murder the entire police department. Was this a prophetic vision that I had? Was this his demon that I was listening to? So I pulled out of this trance. I was very disturbed, and I pulled out of this trance, and immediately Cathy put me back under again. And the second voice I heard was very disturbing. It was pathetic. It was this poor, miserable soul who was trapped inside me, and, oh my God, where am I? This place is horrible. There are diseases everywhere. We were in a diagnostic center where they have diseases in petri dishes everywhere. And I'm not sure who or what that was, but I went under a trance for a third time. And this one was the most disturbing of all, because this was a very succinct, clear voice in my head that said, "I'm the one who shoved your mom." And it was said in such a malevolent way that I knew what happened to my mother was supernatural. I'm not a victim in all this. I learned an awful lot from Cathy. She also taught me how to sever soul ties, which I have used, and that has helped ease a lot of the pain of not being around her. I learned about Lucifer's kingdom. It is a real kingdom, and it's all around us. I learned since then about spiritual warfare and the power of prayer and the power of the name of Jesus Christ in controlling these demons. I took authority that day, that afternoon, and I left. And I told her that I had the authority. You have more authority than you know. Jesus left you with authority as a Christian to cast these things out. Well, that's it for this video. Take care, all. God bless.